Okay, so in the previous video, we got our first Laravel application installed, and I've just opened this up in my editor, which is PHP Storm. I'm just going to zoom in a bit here so you can see the folder structure a little bit easier. And as I said in the introduction video, this can look a little bit overwhelming at first, but don't worry, we're going to focus on a very small area, and then I'm going to introduce you to more of the concepts as the course progresses. So just as a quick flyby overview, we have our app directory. Now this is where most of your core code is going to sit for your application. So if we just expand up on this folder, you can see here we have the providers, the models, HTTP, our exceptions, and then inside of HTTP, this is where the majority of your code is going to sit. We have our controllers and our middleware. And again, we'll come back to this and I'll introduce this to you slowly as we build out the application. So we also have a Bootstrap folder, and this is mainly where Laravel bootstraps itself, and we can add things in as our application grows, but we'll worry about that at a later date. The config folder, that's pretty self-explanatory. This is where any configuration you need for your application is going to sit. The database folder isn't actually the database. This is any code that interacts with the database. So this could be the migrations or the factories or the seeds. And again, we'll cover this in more detail. Don't worry about that. We won't be introducing a database until later on in this series. The lang folder is pretty self-explanatory as well. If you're creating a multi-language application, this is where your language files are going to sit. The public directory is where the entry point for application sits, our index.php. And this also includes any assets such as images, JavaScript, and CSS. Again, we'll come back to this, don't worry. Now, normally you don't do too much work inside this folder. That is for the next folder down, which is resources. So the resources holds all your views, your uncompiled JavaScript and CSS. And then when we compile it, it'll automatically be put in the public folder. But again, don't worry about this. We will cover that in more detail once we reach that point. We then have our routes folder, and this is where we're going to spend the majority of our time early on in this course inside of this routes folder. So this is where requests come into your application, and then the routes decide what to do with that request. So we're going to look at that in a little more detail just after I've looked at these other folders. Then we have our storage folder, and this folder, we don't normally touch this. This is something for the framework really to use. And this is where it stores cached files, any kind of logs that the application might generate. We then also have our test directory. Now this is where you can write your PHP unit tests. Now we won't be covering testing in this series, but I do have other series where we do look into testing. And then obviously our vendor folder. Now the vendor folder, as you probably know, working with any other PHP application, is where Composer installs its dependencies. So obviously you don't really touch that in a PHP application, but just know that it's there. We then have a few other files. Now you don't really need to know what a lot of these do when you're building out your first application. The only one that we're probably going to be looking at is the .env file. Now this is where we can store environment variables, and we'll cover this in more detail later in the series once we reach that point. So let's take a quick look at the routes folder for now. This is where we're going to be starting out. So inside the routes folder, we have 4 root files. So these are the 4 default ones that come with Laravel, and you can create more, but this is a little bit more of an advanced topic, and I will cover that in a separate course when I deep dive into routes. So for now, the 4 that comes with Laravel are API, channels, console, and web. Now we're going to be spending most of our time in the web.php file, and this is where your routes live for your front-end web application. So let's open this up and let's get started. So inside of routes web.php, we can see here there is a little bit of boilerplate code already for us. And we can see there's already one route in there. And this is a route get, and it's /, and then there's this closure function, and then a return view welcome. So what does all this mean? So our route here is a facade for our router. So if you scroll up to the top of the file, you can see here we're using Illuminate Support Facades route. And this just gives us access to Laravel's router. So we can just call route as a static method, and then we can call any methods inside of it. Now you can see here we're using the get method. Now these relate to the HTTP verbs. So again, let's jump over to the documentation and then I can show you what else is available to us. So over in the documentation, we're going to come down to the basics and then we're going to go into routing. Now if we just scroll down here a little bit, you can see here the available router methods. So you should already be a little bit familiar with HTTP verbs. So we've got the get, post, put, patch, delete, and options. So all of these HTTP verbs, we can ask our Laravel application to listen out for them and then route our application depending on that HTTP request. So the majority of the time you're going to be using get. So this is listening for a get request. So this will be a user visiting a page. So let's say, for example, we're writing a blog application and the user goes to /posts. This is a get request. They're just getting a list of the posts. The post method would be when you're creating a new post. So you post that data to the server. So let's jump back over to application and let's create another get route. So underneath our /, so underneath our first route here, let's create a new route and we're going to listen to a get request and then we're going to listen to a get request to what URL. So we can see the first one, it's already got our /, so this is the entry point to the application. But let's create another one. So we're going to say /posts. So whenever a get request comes in to /posts, we're going to run this code. Now there's multiple things we can do here as a second parameter. We can route to a controller, for example, which is what we will be doing the majority of the time. But I'm not going to introduce controllers to you just yet. So I'm going to do a closure here. And then we're going to run this closure. And we're simply just going to echo out hello from posts. So what's going to happen here, whenever a get request comes into /posts, this closure is going to run. And it's a simple closure just with an echo. And it's just going to echo out hello from posts. So now let's start our web server and view this. So back over in our command line. So for ease of use, I'm going to be using PHP's built-in server. And Laravel has a handy CLI tool called Artisan, which makes starting the server very easy. So I'm just going to cd into this new project and then I'm going to run PHP Artisan. So PHP Artisan. And this will give us a list of commands that we can run using the Artisan command line tool. So you can see here, this is quite a big list. And again, don't worry, we're going to touch on these one by one as we go through this course. But let's just scroll up through this list. And you can see up here at the top, we have PHP Artisan serve. And this says serve the application on the PHP development server. So that's what we're going to do. So let me just clear this screen. And then I'm going to say PHP Artisan serve. And this will boot up the server and it'll let you know what it's running on. So you can see here it's on 127.0.01 on port 8000. So we can just open this up in the browser and most terminals will let you just click this link and it'll just open up for you. So now over in our browser, we can now see our welcome page. And this has happened because the get route has matched the / and that has gone to the default route. So let's just jump over to the code quickly and just see that in action. So as we've gone to our website, it's just matched the / URL. And then inside of the closure, it's returned a view of welcome. And we will be looking into views in a little more detail later in this course. So now the next thing, let's try and trigger our get route for /posts. And we should expect to see a message come back saying hello from posts. So let's just give that a try. So on the end here, we can say /posts. And there we go. We get our message, hello from posts. So now we've got our routing up and running. In the next video, let's look at how we can actually return a view file.